The nurse handed me a baby that didn't cry, and the moment I touched her skin, I knew that wasn't my child. 10 days later, I found a photo in my mailbox, a newborn locked in a metal cage, a message smeared in red ink, "Don't trust anyone." I thought giving birth would be the beginning of life, but it was the start of a nightmare I had to walk into alone. If this story already has your heart pounding, hit subscribe and stay with me. What you're about to hear may never leave you. In the dead of winter, Colorado ceased to resemble anything remotely human. Snow blanketed every street, every rooftop, every tree branch with a thick, muting white, silencing the world into a hush that felt like grief. The wind howled not like a song but like a warning, a blade slashing through bone, rattling windows and whispering secrets that no one wanted to hear. At the edge of that storm, the glass doors of St. Vincent Medical Center shuddered as emergency staff wheeled in a stretcher. A woman lay atop it, trembling with pain, sweat dotting her forehead despite the sub-zero temperatures that curled beneath every corner of the hospital's architecture. Her name was Carla Mitchell. She had gone into labor alone, not because she chose to, but because life had demanded it. Just 3 hours earlier, her husband Daniel had been rushed to Mercy General after a head-on collision with a delivery truck on Highway 41. The ambulance carrying Carla was rerouted through snow-blocked roads, scraping against time and fear as contractions tore through her abdomen like rolling thunder. The corridor lights flickered as they moved, fluorescent bulbs casting a ghostly sheen on her pale face. Every ceiling tile seemed endless, every breath a labor of will. Her fingernails dug into the stretcher's metal rail as a contraction overtook her. The nurses moved swiftly, wordlessly. One of them, Lucy, her name tag read, brushed back Carla's damp hair and whispered with gentle urgency that everything would be okay. That lie floated through the air, transparent, useless, and yet oddly comforting. Carla had been carrying twins. The first cries came fast. After being wheeled into labor and delivery, surrounded by masked figures and the rhythmic blip of machines, her first child, a baby girl, was born with a rush of fluid and breath. Her skin was flushed, her cries sharp and immediate, her presence grounding. A miracle in the middle of a snowstorm. The staff placed her briefly on Carla's chest. Warmth returned to her limbs as her lips brushed against the baby's temple. Even through the exhaustion, Carla registered the weight of her daughter's tiny frame, the thick tufts of black hair that reminded her of Daniel, and a scent, clean, earthy, unmistakably new. But that joy was not meant to linger. The second child was slower, too slow. Minutes passed like hours. The room no longer buzzed with celebration but crackled with tension. Something was wrong. There was no cry, no movement. The second baby, a girl, arrived with limp limbs and bluish skin, her silence suffocating the air in the room. Carla asked to see her. The request was met with cautious glances. A nurse briefly held the child up for her to see, and something within Carla recoiled. The baby's face was off, not deformed, but distant, unfocused. Her eyelids twitched, but her eyes held no light, no color. There was no mark beneath her chin. The one Carla had seen seconds after birth, a small, comma-shaped birthmark on fragile, wrinkled skin, gone. The baby was immediately rushed into the NICU. Someone muttered about respiratory distress. Another spoke of oxygen levels, of machines, of vitals. Carla was wheeled into the postpartum unit, sedated lightly under the guise of rest, but her mind refused to sleep. She remembered everything. She remembered the way the child looked when she first emerged, the brief glimpse of that mark, distinct and brown, and slightly raised. She remembered a male nurse, tall, silver-haired, with a stilted gait, standing to the side, watching quietly. He hadn't spoken. He hadn't offered his name. And now, hours later, no one could confirm he was ever there. Outside her hospital window, snow continued to fall. Inside, her heart no longer beat in rhythm. It fluttered, paused, ached. She tried to tell herself she was imagining it, that exhaustion had warped her memory, that grief and hormones made her see things not rooted in fact. But mothers know. Their bodies remember things logic cannot explain. That evening, the nurse named Paige came in to check her vitals. Carla asked to see both babies. Paige told her the first was sleeping soundly beside her, and the second was still under observation. Stable, she said. But stable was not a comfort. It was an evasion. Carla sat up slowly, her limbs heavy, her throat dry. She looked into the bassinet beside her bed. Her daughter, the first, lay swaddled, cheeks pink, tiny fists curled. Carla traced her fingertip along the baby's forehead. A soft pulse beat beneath paper-thin skin. Her eyes fluttered, as if dreaming. But Carla's thoughts drifted elsewhere. What if she was right? What if something had happened in that room during the transfer, during those moments of chaos and distraction? Hospitals were supposed to be sanctuaries, places of healing, order. But chaos lived there too, hidden behind scrubs and protocol. What if her second baby wasn't her baby? The next morning, Carla requested her medical records. A young resident, Dr. Andrew Thomas, met with her. He was kind but distant. He used words like exhaustion, temporary confusion, and sedation lapse. He explained that postnatal memory often played tricks, that birthmarks could fade. Carla listened, but she didn't believe him. She didn't believe anyone anymore. Late that night, she rose from bed while the hallway slept. She moved like a ghost, sliding through silent doors, heart pounding with each step. A nurse had left an access card unattended at the desk. Carla took it. She didn't feel guilt, only resolve. The NICU hummed with quiet machinery. Blue lights blinked in rhythm. Inside the incubator, her second child lay surrounded by tubes. Her skin looked pallid under the sterile lights, lips tinged purple. Carla stood still, hands trembling against the glass. She watched for signs, anything. The baby did not move. No blink, no stretch. Just the soft rise and fall of breath, barely perceptible. Behind her, a voice broke the silence. "What are you doing here?" She turned. It was the man from the delivery room, same coat, same limp. But no name tag. His face was shadowed, unreadable. "I'm her mother," Carla said. "I have the right." "Not at this hour," he replied coldly. He stepped closer, and for the briefest moment, their eyes met. His were dull, sunken, devoid of empathy. The eyes of a man who had seen too much, or perhaps believed in nothing. Carla stepped back. He said no more, just stood there as she left, the door closing behind her like the last note of a funeral song. That night, she didn't sleep. Her first child stirred gently in the bassinet beside her, but Carla's thoughts stayed with the other one, the silent one, the one who may or may not have come from her body. She began writing, a list of everything she remembered, every nurse, every doctor, every detail. She sketched the marks she had seen. She noted the baby's scent. She described the man's limp, the stillness in his voice, the odd way he never touched anything. She wrote until her hands ached. When she was done, she placed the notebook on the table, turned off the light, and whispered to herself, "This isn't over." And outside, the blizzard raged on. Day 2 arrived with an eerie stillness. Snow still fell outside, blanketing the hospital grounds like a shroud, muffling sound, muting the world. Inside room 312, the hum of fluorescent lights and distant paging calls couldn't drown out the disquiet building within Carla. She had held her first daughter in her arms through the long hours of the night, studying every feature. There was peace in that baby's face, serenity even in sleep. Her skin radiated warmth, her breathing steady, her scent, soft, slightly milky and familiar, wrapped around Carla like a memory. This was her child. There was no question, no doubt. But the other one, the baby in the NICU, no matter how many reassurances were offered by the staff, no matter how many charts were read aloud with clean language and neutral tone, Carla's instincts refused to be silenced. Mothers knew things before science could prove them. She couldn't explain it, but she felt it as deeply as her own pulse. Something was wrong, and it wasn't just the lack of crying, the bluish skin, or the mechanical stillness of that second baby. It was absence, emptiness, a hollowness she could not describe. Something missing where connection should have been. That morning she asked Nurse Page again about the second baby. Page's smile was a practiced one, but not cruel. She answered with care, speaking slowly as though Carla might be fragile. "The baby is stable," she said again. "Vitals are steady. She's still under observation, but her condition isn't life-threatening." "Then why won't she look at me?" Carla asked softly. "Why does she feel foreign?" Page's expression flickered, just for a moment. A crease formed between her brows before she tucked it away. "I'm not sure what you mean." But Carla knew exactly what she meant. It wasn't a matter of uncertainty, it was knowing too clearly, and being terrified of how clear it was. After Page left, Carla unwrapped her daughter from the swaddle and examined her body inch by inch. She wasn't looking for abnormalities, she was looking for assurance, for reality. For the birthmark she remembered, the comma-shaped one under the second baby's chin, that was absent from the child in the NICU. What haunted her wasn't just what was gone, it was that no one else seemed to remember it had ever been there. She had read stories, urban legends, whispered tragedies, swapped babies, stolen children, medical cover-ups, but those happened somewhere else, to someone else. Not to women like her. Not to careful, cautious mothers with birth plans and pre-packed bags and maternity leaves arranged 6 months in advance. And yet, here she was. Alone, suspicious, treated like she was unraveling. Mid-morning brought Dr. Andrew Thomas back into her room. He was younger than most of the other physicians, and his voice had a cautious sympathy that others lacked. He carried a clipboard, a file folder, and something behind his eyes that resembled hesitation. Carla didn't ask questions right away. She simply sat with her arms folded, the blanket draped over her knees, her back stiff against the pillows. She let him speak first. The second baby is still in the NICU. She's being monitored closely, but her oxygen levels have improved. No signs of infection. We're optimistic. Carla turned her gaze toward the window. The snow hadn't stopped. She wondered if it ever would. There's no record of a birthmark, Andrew continued, flipping through the file. Not on any nurse notes, not on your intake reports. That doesn't mean you're wrong. It's possible it was just pigmentation at birth that faded. No, Carla said. I saw it. Andrew paused. We're willing to take new photos if that helps. Compare markings. We can even bring in a pediatric dermatologist. I want to run a DNA test. Andrew blinked. That's a serious request, he said, his tone changing slightly. It requires paperwork. Consent from the other parent. Carla looked him directly in the eyes. My husband's in intensive care. He doesn't even know he has 2 daughters yet. I am their mother, and I know what I saw. If this was your child, would you accept silence? He said nothing, but he didn't look away. I'll see what I can do, he said after a moment. She didn't thank him, not because she wasn't grateful, but because truth shouldn't require permission. That evening, Carla called Emily. She kept her voice low, almost whispering, as if the walls could listen. She spoke of the missing birthmark, the baby's lifeless eyes, the man with the limp, the records that had vanished. She didn't ask Emily to believe her. She didn't plead for validation. She just told her what was real. That night, sleep never came. Carla remained still in bed, but her mind raced, reliving the labor, the moments between, the flicker of time when her second daughter had been pulled from her body, and something about her gaze felt borrowed. Outside the window, the blizzard raged without apology. The snow showed no signs of relenting, and the wind rattled the glass panes like a voice trying to speak. Her hands gripped the edge of the thin blanket covering her legs, as if holding on to something tangible, something real, in a world that suddenly no longer felt so. Emily had promised to help, quietly, but fiercely. She would tap into the staff registry across networks, look into digital signatures, and help Carla understand what couldn't be explained. But Carla knew that information alone wasn't enough. She needed something undeniable, something no one could bury. She needed the truth to bleed on paper, and so she planned. By midnight, the hospital was quiet again, reduced to humming machines and the distant buzz of the nurses' station down the hall. She waited, watching as the hallway lights dimmed into their overnight glow. At the desk, a nurse had stepped away briefly, leaving her access card atop a clipboard. Carla slipped it off without hesitation, not out of recklessness, but out of resolve. She moved through the corridor like shadow, quiet, deliberate, invisible. She had already memorized the route to the NICU, every bend, every light flicker, every second she had to pass through without being seen. Inside, the second baby lay beneath a cocoon of wires, monitors, and blue light. Carla approached slowly, her breath tight in her throat. The infant looked fragile beneath the halo of machines. Her skin was no longer as purple, but it remained too pale, as if blood itself refused to claim her. Her hands were clenched, unmoving. Her chest rose and fell mechanically, aided by artificial rhythm. This time, Carla didn't just watch. She reached into her pocket and retrieved the tiny pair of scissors Emily had told her to bring. Just a strand, not enough to harm, but enough to test. Her fingers trembled as she clipped 2 strands of hair, fine, barely visible. She sealed them in a paper envelope, labeled only with a single letter, B. Back in her room, she repeated the process with her first daughter. That child stirred slightly in her sleep, mouth twitching in a half-formed dream. Her warmth burned into Carla's fingertips like a memory. She cut 2 strands, sealed them into another envelope, A. Then she waited. Emily had arranged a discreet courier, someone from an independent lab who owed her a favor. At 2:07 a.m., Carla slipped down the back stairwell, the folded envelopes hidden beneath her maternity robe. A man stood at the emergency exit, wearing a delivery uniform and a baseball cap pulled low over his face. He didn't ask questions. She didn't offer words. The transfer was quiet, swift, like passing a secret to the wind. "Results in 36 hours, he whispered. And just like that, he was gone. Back in her room, Carla sat in the dark, her knees pulled to her chest. She stared at the wall, unblinking. The sterile scent of the hospital no longer comforted her. It smelled like masks, like cover stories, like truth smothered beneath paperwork. She didn't know who she could trust anymore. The doctors spoke in rehearsed lines. The nurses carried eyes that avoided hers. Only Ethan, the night nurse with the hesitant hands and unsure posture, had shown anything resembling doubt. Doubt, she realized, was more honest than confidence in places like this. That morning, Ethan returned to her room. He looked around before speaking. His voice was low, barely above breath. "I saw someone leave something outside your door last night." "A man." Carla straightened, tall, limped a little. "I thought maybe he was a family member. But..." He stood there too long. Didn't knock. Just dropped something and left. Carla's heart began to race. "What did he look like?" Ethan shook his head. Didn't see his face, just the way he moved, like he was watching, measuring, not visiting. She said nothing, but the truth bloomed in her chest like a bruise. It was the same man, the one who had stood in the delivery room, silent and unacknowledged, the one no one admitted to seeing. He hadn't disappeared. He was still here, somewhere inside this building, behind some uniform or locked door or fake name. He was still watching and waiting. The envelope arrived just after dawn on the third day. It was discreet, plain white, sealed in plastic, tucked beneath Carla's breakfast tray, as if it were just another delivery from dietary staff. But she knew better. Her hands reached for it even before she registered the scent of oatmeal or the clink of cutlery. The envelope bore no name, no label, just a subtle red dot on the corner, Emily's silent signal. Carla peeled it open, careful not to tear. Inside were 2 printed sheets, folded with the precision of someone who understood urgency. The words blurred for a moment before she forced her vision to steady. Sample A, 99.998% maternal match. Carla Mitchell. Sample B, no biological match to Carla. Mitchell or Daniel Carter, database match, not found in national record status. Unregistered human subject. Carla read the lines twice, then a third time. Then she folded the paper in half and let it sit in her lap, her hands resting gently over it as if it were a body. Something had died, not a person, but an illusion, a delicate fraying belief that maybe she was just tired, that maybe she had imagined it all, that hospitals, places built to preserve life, would never let something like this happen. But here it was, in her hands. The truth that lived in her bones now lived on paper. One of the babies was not hers, and not just that, the other baby didn't belong to anyone. The implications coiled inside her chest like smoke in a sealed room. An unregistered child meant more than error, it meant intention. Somewhere someone had planned this, crafted it, designed it to go unnoticed. But they hadn't counted on her. Carla stood slowly, steadying herself against the bed frame. Her body still ached from childbirth, from nights without sleep, from fear lodged in the joints of her spine. But none of it mattered anymore. She placed the papers into the lining of her hospital robe and stepped into the corridor. She didn't knock. She didn't wait. She walked straight into the administrative office on the 4th floor, past the front desk, past the startled assistant, until she stood face to face with Margaret Harris, the head of Human Resources. The woman blinked, startled, then composed herself. "Can I help you, Ms. Mitchell?" Carla held up the birth certificate, the one signed by Valerie Grant. "I need to verify this signature." Margaret took the paper and looked down, her brows furrowed slowly, deeply, like the unfolding of a memory she hadn't meant to recall. "This signature," she said quietly, "is not Valerie Grant. That name doesn't exist in our system." Carla said nothing, just waited. "This handwriting..." Margaret hesitated, then opened a drawer and pulled out a dusty personnel file. She laid it beside the certificate. 2 signatures, different names, same curvature, same slant, same peculiar way the R curled like a hook. "This is Robert Martin's handwriting," Margaret said finally. Carla didn't flinch. The name was no longer a phantom. It was fact. "Robert was terminated over 2 years ago," Margaret added. "He was caught accessing restricted areas. After the investigation, he vanished. No forwarding address. Nothing. And yet, Carla said, her voice dry as bone, he walked into your delivery wing, signed my baby's birth papers, and left with one child. Margaret's lips parted, but no words came. Carla took back the papers. I don't want apologies. I want access to footage, to records, to every shift change from that night. I can't. You will, Carla interrupted. Because if I walk out that door and hand this to a lawyer, I promise you your hospital won't survive the winter. Then she left. Back in her room, the walls felt smaller. The first baby slept soundly. Her real daughter, the one whose breath she knew by heart. But the other one, NB 4782, remained in the NICU, untouched, unclaimed, unexplained. And still, Carla could not forget her. There was something tragic about the child, something that lived beyond biology, an ache, a question, a soul trying to surface. She reached for her notebook and began listing names again, not for answers now, but for war. Later that day, Carla returned to the NICU, not as a mother seeking comfort, but as a witness pursuing truth. Her footsteps no longer hesitated. She walked with purpose, but not panic. There was a clarity to her now, the kind that emerged only after certainty shattered fear. The baby was still there, as pale and silent as ever. The monitors beeped with artificial steadiness. Carla stood behind the glass watching, not the child but the patterns, the way the nurses moved, the way they avoided her eyes, the way silence had become part of the air here. She wasn't invisible, she was inconvenient. She turned back down the hall and spotted Ethan at the nurse's desk. He looked tired, like most of them did, but his expression still carried traces of something the others had long buried: conflict. She approached slowly. He didn't look surprised to see her. I need a name, she said softly. The man from the delivery, silver hair, limp, night shift. Ethan's lips parted, then closed. A small breath left his chest. There's no one by that description on our staff list, he said. I've checked, more than once. Then who was he? I thought he was an external tech, a floater from another unit. They sometimes bring in temps for emergency coverage, but he had no badge. Ethan didn't respond. Someone signed off on the chart under the name Valerie Grant, Carla continued. HR says it's Robert Martin's handwriting. At that, Ethan's eyes widened just slightly, not enough for alarm, but enough to confirm recognition. I didn't think he'd come back, Ethan whispered. Carla took a step closer. You knew him? Not well, Ethan admitted. He was strange, obsessed with control. Always talked about babies needing purity, whatever that meant. He got fired for tampering with neonatal logs. They said he was unstable, but they never made it public. Carla's voice was like ice. He signed my child's birth certificate. Ethan shook his head slowly. No one was supposed to let him back in. Someone did. He looked away. The silence between them said more than words. There were cracks in the walls of this place, places where protocol didn't reach, where people looked the other way because they didn't want to see. Carla didn't press further. She didn't have to. The truth was unraveling. That evening, Emily sent a message through the secure channel they'd been using. I found something. You need to meet someone. Carla met her 2 hours later in the underground parking lot beneath the hospital, the space dim and humming with distant generators. Emily brought someone with her, a nurse from another ward, early 30s, eyes sunken from long hours, voice small. Her name was Bella. I was there that night, Bella said. Not in your room, but on call. I saw the man. He didn't speak to anyone, just walked in. We assumed he was new. Floaters come and go during storms. Did anyone question it? Carla asked. Bella hesitated. No one wanted to. Too much chaos. The snowstorm, the accident cases. We were overwhelmed. Carla clenched her jaw, so he walked in, and walked out, with a baby that wasn't his. Bella nodded, then lowered her voice. There's more. She reached into her coat and pulled out a folded paper, a shift schedule, annotated. Handwritten notes lined the margins. This is from that night, Bella whispered. There are blank entries where signatures should be, at least 3 hours where no one logged anything. I tried to bring it up. They told me the system glitched, told me not to worry. Carla took the paper. The ink was smudged near the edges. Someone had tried to wipe the truth away. Why are you telling me this? Because they're watching me now. They know I ask questions. Who? I don't know. But yesterday, my login credentials were locked. I haven't been allowed on shift since. Carla stared at her. You're scared. Bella nodded. And you should be too. The call came just before sunrise. Emily's voice was hollow, strained. There was no need for greetings, no time for polite concern. Her words fell like stones into Carla's chest. Bella's gone. The silence on Carla's end said everything. She didn't show up to her shift, Emily continued. Didn't answer her phone. Her apartment door was unlocked when they went to check. No signs of struggle, no note, just gone. Carla sat motionless in the hospital chair, one hand resting over her daughter's bassinet, the other clutched tightly around the edge of the blanket. Her pulse ticked like a second heartbeat. What about the shift log she gave us? Carla asked. Deleted from the hospital server this morning. Scrubbed clean. Carla exhaled through her nose, steady but sharp. The space around her grew colder, tighter, as though the room itself had turned against her. What had once been paranoia now bloomed into proof. The doubt was no longer hers alone. It had form, a name, a pattern. Someone was erasing the trail. After the call, Carla moved quietly. She dressed with purpose, combed her hair, folded the results of the DNA test into the lining of her bag, and wrapped her infant daughter in a fresh blanket. She fed her slowly, methodically, watching the baby's face for anything, any change, any sign that the world might still have gentleness in it. She no longer trusted the hospital, but she couldn't leave. Not yet. Not without knowing where her son was. Later that morning, Dr. Andrew Thomas returned. His usual gentle demeanor had dimmed into something brittle. We're receiving a system update, he explained, standing at the foot of her bed. Certain files might be temporarily inaccessible, including NICU monitoring records. Carla stared at him, unreadable. Bella didn't show up today, she said flatly. Andrew nodded once. I heard she was under review for breaking confidentiality, or punished for telling the truth. He didn't respond. She leaned forward. You know something, don't you? Andrew hesitated. His eyes darted briefly to the door, then back. I know that whatever's happening here didn't start with you, he said quietly, and I know some people will do anything to keep it from ending with you. Before she could reply, a soft knock interrupted them. A nurse entered, holding a small parcel. This was left at the front desk, she said. No sender listed. Carla took it without speaking. The nurse left. Andrew lingered, uncertain. You okay? She nodded, though she wasn't. After he left, Carla peeled open the wrapping. Inside was a photograph, printed on worn sepia-toned paper, faded at the edges, old. The image was blurry but unmistakable. A metal cage, a child inside, not screaming, not crying, just staring, face bruised, arms bound with what looked like cloth soaked in blood. Behind the child, carved into the wooden floor, was a symbol. Crude, circular, like an open eye. And beneath the photo, folded once, was a single sheet of paper. On it, in jagged red ink, were the words, He will perform the ritual under the full moon. Your child is in Pine Hollow. Don't trust anyone. Carla dropped the paper. Her hands trembled, not from fear but from clarity. They weren't just hiding something. They were preparing something. Carla didn't sleep that night. She stared at the ceiling as the wind howled outside her hospital window, fingers curling and uncurling around the blood-smeared message. The image of the bruised baby behind the iron bars refused to fade from her mind. At dawn, she called Emily. Her voice was hushed, almost reverent. There's a symbol on the floor in the photo. I've never seen it before. It looks like an eye. There was a long pause on the other end of the line. Emily's tone shifted, no longer just concerned but afraid. Carla, she whispered, I've seen that symbol before, once. Carla sat up slowly. In an archived psychiatric file, Emily continued, a nurse, fired years ago from a facility outside Denver. The patient's name was Robert Martin. The name landed like a brick in Carla's stomach. Emily read aloud from her screen. Subject displays obsessive compulsions toward infant silence, references ritual purity, draws circular symbols resembling an eye, believes crying corrupts the soul. Carla stood. Her knees felt weak, but her focus was sharper than ever. He's the one, she breathed. He took my son. Emily confirmed it. Robert Martin was last traced to a remote woodland area near the Canadian border, a forgotten place called Pine Hollow, off-grid. No formal roads, known by locals for strange lights, lost hikers, and the sound of crying babies in the night. It wasn't just a theory now, it was a direction. By mid-morning, Carla was out of her bed, dressed in plain jeans and a borrowed coat. She tucked the photograph and the letter into her inside pocket. Before she left, she looked one last time at the sleeping form of the swapped baby girl, still nameless, still fragile. There was a heaviness in her chest that had nothing to do with hatred. In that infant silence was a sorrow deeper than confusion, deeper than resentment. A child born into a lie, perhaps more lost than her own son. Carla whispered, I'll come back for you. She asked Dr. Andrew to transfer the baby to a trusted facility, St. Mary's, under temporary observation. No explanation, just a request made with haunted eyes. He agreed without question. At the hospital exit, she passed the nurse's station. Trinity, the only night nurse who had spoken honestly, caught her gaze. "You shouldn't go alone," Trinity said under her breath. "I'm not," Carla replied. "I'm going with the truth." By late afternoon, Carla was on a bus, an old paper map folded beside her, her grip tight around the armrest. Through the scratched glass of the window, the world blurred into pine trees, snowy plains, and towns with names she didn't recognize. The closer they drew to Pine Hollow, the heavier the sky became, as if even the weather knew what was buried there. A few rows back, an old man with clouded eyes tapped her shoulder. "You headed toward the forest?" he asked. She hesitated, then nodded. "Careful," he said. "That place ain't quiet 'cause it's peaceful. It's quiet 'cause it remembers." She didn't answer, but her heart did. Somewhere in that silence her son waited, not screaming, not crying, just waiting. The sky darkened as the bus snaked its way through the Appalachian backroads, moving slower now, as if reluctant to approach what lay ahead. Carla sat rigid in her seat, her hand clenched around the photo of her son. His face, bruised, blurred by shadow, stared up at her, quiet and waiting. Outside, the trees thickened. Pines grew close enough to tangle together, casting long shadows across the winding trail. A brittle wooden sign appeared near the final stop, barely legible through grime and age. "Pine Hollow, population 48. The bus driver glanced back at her, the first and only time he acknowledged her presence. "You sure?" he asked gruffly. "Not much out here, just woods and ghosts." Carla didn't respond. She stood, stepped off, and felt the wind bite her exposed skin. The cold in Pine Hollow was different, not sharp, but hollow. It settled into her chest like damp fog. The town was almost silent. Old houses with slanted porches leaned into the wind. Windows were shuttered. Smoke curled weakly from 2 chimneys. No children, no laughter, only the slow ticking of an unseen clock. She made her way through the gravel path, following Emily's directions, past the general store, across the abandoned chapel, then north toward the woods. An old ranger station sat just before the tree line. There she met the man Emily had told her about. Andrew Nelson, retired police investigator, now living on the edge of what everyone else had long forgotten. He was weathered and tall, with a limp in his left leg and a worn revolver on his hip. "You're Carla," he said, not asked. She nodded. "You came alone?" "Not really," she said. "My son is here." Nelson studied her for a moment, then motioned toward the map nailed to the wall. "He's taken children before. I tried to stop him once, got shut down, they erased the trail. Until now." Carla's eyes fixed on a red circle drawn onto the topographical layout of the hills. It was marked, "Cemetery Trailhead, do not enter." "That's where he was last spotted," Nelson said. "Locals won't go near it. Say the air changes past the 3rd mile. They hear crying that isn't theirs." Carla looked up. "Will you take me?" He hesitated. Then slowly he pulled down a key from a hook, old brass and cold to the touch. "No, but I'll show you the way to begin." That night, she stayed in the ranger cabin. She couldn't sleep. She replayed the sound of her son's breath, or what she remembered of it, in her mind like a lullaby with missing notes. Outside, wind whispered through trees like voices trapped beneath bark. At dawn, Carla stepped into the forest. The trail narrowed fast, swallowed by pine and frost. Her boots cracked thin patches of ice. Animal tracks veered away from the path. Even they knew better. Halfway through the 1st mile, she passed the old cemetery. The tombstones were crumbled, names nearly gone, but one stood taller than the rest, carved with a symbol, the same symbol from the photo, the same mark drawn in blood, a warning, and an invitation. Beyond that point, the wind grew still, so still that her own breath startled her. The trees leaned closer together, forming a tunnel of dark. Somewhere deep ahead, something cracked, like wood or bone. Carla stopped. The silence wasn't empty anymore. It was listening. The deeper she walked, the less the world felt real. The forest wasn't simply thick, it was closing. Branches curved like fingers over the trail, the earth soft and cold beneath her boots. Every breath she took sounded too loud. Even the birds had gone silent, their songs swallowed by something unseen. By the time she reached mile 3, Carla's flashlight flickered. The batteries were new. It shouldn't have happened. Still, the beam stuttered like a failing heartbeat. She paused to drink from the metal canteen Emily had packed, but even water tasted strange here, slightly metallic, as if it had been sitting too long in silence. Around her, the air smelled of damp moss and something else. Decay, not fresh death, but the kind that lingered in forgotten basements and under unmarked graves. She was close. Then from between the trees she saw it, the shack. It looked exactly as described: rotting wood, chained doors, a broken window sealed with moldy cloth. But what startled her wasn't its presence. It was the fact that the ground around it had no snow, no frost. The cold avoided this place like even the weather knew to stay away. Carla circled the cabin, heart pounding. Her hands shook as she pulled the crowbar from her pack. She avoided the front door, too obvious, and searched instead for weakness. At the rear, behind collapsed timbers, she found it, a trapdoor, half buried under leaves and rotting boards. Her gloves muffled the sound of the metal meeting wood as she pried. Each nail screamed in protest. With one final grunt, the hatch gave way. A gust of warm, fetid air struck her full in the face. It reeked of mold, blood, and something animal. She gagged. Below, a wooden staircase led into the dark. Carla hesitated at the top step. She thought of her son's skin, bruised and bloodied in that photo. She thought of the symbol carved into the wood, the anonymous letter smeared in red. She thought of the baby girl, the one who was never hers, yet looked at her now like she was all she had. And then she descended. The stairs creaked beneath her, announcing every step like a confession. At the bottom, the cellar unfolded, a grotesque theater of forgotten rituals. Walls lined with pinned photographs, all newborns, all bound. A table covered in jars of unknown liquids, rusted tools, blood-streaked pages with drawings of human figures, half dissected, half worshipped. And in the center, a crib, a real one, clean, made of white wood and lace, too clean. Carla stepped toward it, heart ready to break, but it was empty. Suddenly, a whisper echoed behind her. Not a voice, not quite, but a sound, like breath moving through a pipe, slow and deliberate. She spun around, flashlight swinging. Nothing. Then footsteps above, faint, deliberate. Someone was here. She killed the light, sank into the shadows, heart thudding against her ribs. A voice, low, trembling, echoed down the stairwell. "You came." Carla didn't respond. Her throat closed. The voice was male, slow, almost gentle, but there was no kindness in it. "I watched you walk through the woods," the voice said. "Mothers always come, even when they shouldn't." He was near the door now. A silhouette passed across the light from above, tall, thin, with shoulders that drooped like wet branches. "I let you see the photo," he continued. "I wanted to know if you'd sign, and you did, in blood." Her pulse surged. "Robert, you don't understand what I'm doing," he whispered. "This world raises children to cry, to scream, to beg. I'm saving them, teaching them silence." Carla couldn't listen anymore. She lunged from the dark, swinging the crowbar with all her strength. It struck the wall as he dodged, metal sparking on stone. He moved fast, too fast for his frame, and shoved her back. Carla tumbled, landing hard. Her ribs screamed. Pain clouded her thoughts. But she saw it. Behind him in the corner, a child. Her child. Wrapped in cloth, barely breathing. Eyes swollen, face pale. No sound, no tears. Carla screamed his name. The boy didn't move. Robert stepped in front of him. "If you take him now, he'll never finish learning. He'll always cry, always suffer." Carla's voice cracked. "Then I'll suffer with him," and she reached for the blade in her coat. The days that followed were a blur of sirens, flashing lights, and sterile hospital corridors. Carla watched her son breathe with help from machines, his chest rising and falling with the cadence of fragility. Around him, doctors whispered, nurses moved gently, and monitors hummed like lullabies for the broken. She had brought him back, but at what cost? Robert Martin was in custody. The basement had yielded evidence too horrible to forget. Photographs, videos, chemicals, and journals that spoke of a mind divorced from empathy. A man who viewed infants not as lives but as raw material, vessels for his deranged ideology. The court moved quickly. Given the volume of evidence and public pressure, a closed-door preliminary hearing was scheduled within days. It would not be a full trial, yet. But it would be the first time Carla and Robert would face each other in the realm of justice. The night before the hearing, Carla sat in her hospital room, holding a copy of the report. Subject exhibits extreme trauma from prolonged emotional deprivation and physical confinement. Estimated survival without rescue, under 72 hours. She didn't cry. She'd done all her crying in the forest. Now she sharpened her mind like a blade. And the courtroom smelled of oak and tension. Carla wore a simple black blouse, no makeup, her face pale but composed. Emily sat behind her, squeezing her hand. Across the room, Sheriff Lewis Bennett and retired officer Andrew Nelson reviewed files, grim expressions etched deep into their faces. Robert Martin was escorted in, his wrists cuffed, his face sallow and unrepentant. He scanned the room not with fear, but with something colder, calculation. The judge called the room to order. The prosecutor, Anne Baldwin, rose to speak. Her voice was clear, unwavering. "We are here today to confirm charges of infant abduction, medical facility breach, psychological torture, and attempted murder. The state will present preliminary evidence establishing not only probable cause, but moral urgency." She turned toward Carla. "And we call Carla Mitchell to testify." Carla stood slowly. The room didn't blur this time. She walked with the weight of purpose, not fear. As she took the stand, the judge looked at her gently. "You may speak freely, Ms. Mitchell." She didn't start with anger. She didn't start with accusation. She started with a heartbeat. "My son was born 10 days ago," she said quietly. "He was small, breathing shallow, but he had a birthmark under his chin, a small comma-shaped mark. I remember touching it with my thumb before they took him from the room." She paused. "And when I held the baby they gave back to me, that mark was gone." There was a rustle in the gallery. She went on. "I know what people thought, that I was tired, hysterical, delusional. That postpartum confusion had warped my mind." She leaned forward slightly, voice firm. "But it didn't, because the truth was much worse." Her eyes didn't leave Robert's face. "You took my child. No reaction, not a blink. You starved him, you injected him with chemicals. You tried to break him so he would no longer cry." She didn't raise her voice. It remained soft, but it cut through the courtroom like winter wind. "I want this court to understand something," she said, her hands clasped. "This is not just about one child. This man, this system of silence, targets the very thing that defines humanity: vulnerability, emotion, love." Judge Wallace nodded solemnly. "Thank you, Ms. Mitchell. You may step down." Then he turned to Robert. "Mr. Martin, do you have anything to say in response?" The room held its breath. Robert stood slowly. His voice, when it came, was hoarse but calm. "I do not dispute the evidence," he said, "but I reject your morality." A ripple passed through the courtroom. "I was not destroying those children," he continued. "I was freeing them from pain, from noise, from chaos." His eyes scanned the room like he was reciting scripture. "You call me a monster because I believe silence is salvation, that the cry of a newborn is the first lie they learn. I ended that lie." Carla's hands clenched into fists. Robert raised his voice slightly. "She came to me willingly, signed in blood. She asked to know the truth, and I showed her." Anne Baldwin rose swiftly. "Your Honor, the state requests psychiatric evaluation and full isolation during the upcoming trial. The defendant's statements are consistent with delusional belief systems bordering on sociopathic detachment." Judge Wallace didn't need convincing. Granted. That evening, Carla returned to the hospital. Her son had opened his eyes. They were dull, distant, but open. She sat beside him for hours, telling him stories he couldn't yet understand, about rivers and sunshine, about his father, about a woman named Lucy who was once a stranger but now slept peacefully in a crib beside his, about what it meant to fight and what it meant to return. And 3 days later, the public trial began. Reporters were kept at bay, but the world watched through summaries and leaked documents. #Justice for Newborns trended online. Hospitals launched internal investigations. Whistleblowers came forward. Robert's network wasn't vast, but it was real. A chain of like-minded individuals who believed in reducing human noise. Former nurses, failed therapists, loners who'd found doctrine in madness. Robert had written a manifesto. In it, he called babies unfinished vessels, claimed pain was the sculptor that shaped them, argued that mothers were the infection that delayed true transformation. The court reviewed everything, and when it was time for closing remarks, Anne Baldwin stood once more. "We do not ask the court merely for punishment," she said. "We ask for protection, for vigilance, for remembrance." She turned slightly toward Carla. "This case is about a mother who was told her fear was irrational, that her instincts were wrong, that her grief was imaginary." Her voice thickened, and yet, she was right. Then she looked at the jury, and if she hadn't fought, her child would be dead. The room fell still. The verdict took only hours. Robert Martin, guilty on all charges. Sentenced to 28 years in prison, with mandatory psychological treatment, no chance of parole. As he was escorted out, he looked over his shoulder, one last time, at Carla, and smiled. She didn't smile back, she turned away, because that chapter had closed. And her children, both of them, were waiting. Spring came late that year. The snow receded in patches, like wounds healing from the edges inward. Trees still stood bare, but the earth beneath them began to breathe again. In Carla's world, the seasons hadn't just changed, they had reset. 3 months had passed since the trial. The house she now lived in was smaller than her old one, tucked into a quiet neighborhood near the edge of town. It had creaky floorboards, faded wallpaper, and a porch that groaned when the wind blew. But it also had windows that let in the morning sun, and rooms that echoed with laughter. Soft, uncertain, but real. Lucy, the girl who had once been labeled a mistake, now toddled around with wide eyes and a cautious curiosity. She still didn't speak, but she had begun to hum, a low, rhythmic sound she made when she sat near the window. No one taught it to her. She just found it. Carla had once feared she would never feel love for Lucy, that the knowledge of how she entered her life would forever taint their bond. But that fear had passed quietly, replaced by something deeper than biology: presence. Lucy was there. She reached for Carla in the middle of the night. She smiled when held. She leaned into her shoulder like it was home. That was enough. And her son, Noah, was healing too, slowly, delicately. At first he barely made a sound. His cries were hollow, uncertain, as if asking permission. But in time, they grew fuller, stronger, more human. And when he cried now, Carla didn't hush him. She held him closer, because sound, she had learned, was not the enemy. It was proof of life. The visits to the trauma center were weekly. Carla met with Dr. Elaine Robbins, a quiet woman with kind eyes and no clipboard. Their sessions were not full of analysis. They were full of space. Space to breathe, to remember, to not be okay. One morning, Carla sat in the windowed room and stared at the small tree outside. "I used to think," she said slowly, "that I had to be strong for them, that falling apart was failure, that crying meant they'd inherit my fear." Dr. Robbins waited. "But now I think maybe breaking was part of it. Maybe shattering was the only way I could rebuild." She looked down at her hands. "They didn't need me to be a wall. They just needed me to stay." The doctor said nothing. She simply nodded. That day, Carla left the session lighter, not fixed, but less afraid of the cracks. Later that week, she received a letter in the mail. Handwritten, no return address. Inside was a photograph. It was taken from afar, the cabin in Pine Hollow, now burned to the ground, just ash and timbers and smoke rising like a final breath. On the back of the photo was a single sentence: "No more silence," no signature. But Carla knew who had sent it. Trinity, maybe, or Officer Nelson, someone who had seen what she had, someone who had decided that silence would no longer be sacred. She folded the photo and placed it in the drawer next to her bed, not as a threat, but as a promise. In June, Carla brought the children to the park. It was Lucy's first time seeing a pond. She ran toward it with wide steps, stumbling once, then laughing, truly laughing, when she saw her reflection ripple in the water. Carla sat on the bench nearby, Noah sleeping against her chest in a soft wrap. A woman approached, elderly, holding a book and a cane. "Beautiful children," the woman said. Carla smiled. "They are," the woman nodded. "You know," she said gently, "most people think birth is the beginning. But it isn't." Carla looked at her. "It's what comes after the break," the woman continued. "That's when you're born, when you've seen what can't be unseen, when you choose to love anyway." And then she walked away, leaving the scent of lavender in her wake. That night, Carla sat by the window, holding both children. Lucy had fallen asleep in her lap. Noah stirred slightly in his wrap, fingers curling. She looked at them, truly looked. 2 children, one born from her, one born from pain, but both hers now. Completely, she whispered a lullaby into the quiet air, not to hush them, but to bless the noise. Outside, the stars blinked overhead. Inside, Carla smiled softly and said the words that had once felt impossible. "We're home." Not every mother finds her child again. Not every child escapes the darkness. But sometimes, against all odds, love wins. This wasn't just a story about fear or loss. It was about instinct, about courage, about the quiet strength of a woman who refused to be silenced. And maybe, somewhere inside this story, you felt something too. If you've ever followed a gut feeling that no one else believed, leave a comment below. I'd love to hear your story. And if this journey moved you even just a little, Don't forget to like, subscribe, and turn on notifications. There are more stories like this, and they're closer to the truth than you think.